Let's talk about the past and Ateneo's response during the martial law period, 72 to 86. Some say that the Ateneo was not as vocal, not as strong in its anti-martial law position at that time. Care to comment on that, or is that a fair assessment of the Ateneo during that period?
Well, first of all, it was a time of ferment, no? And certainly a time of activism. In fact, we can start with 1968, Down from the Hill, the manifesto in the guidon of some students. At that time, they were already saying that the Ateneo was not responsive, no, to the needs of the country, that Ateneo remained to be an elitist institution, and that we needed to do was to respond to the demands of the national situation. And so therefore, there was an effort to do that. Remember that this was also coming out of a situation where the church was coming out of Vatican II, no, trying to address the problems of faith and justice, no, the modern world. So there was a time when people were thinking about this. But obviously there was also a debate about how exactly do you confront the Marcos government, even before martial law. No? So there was division. And I think when martial law was declared, or even just before martial law, obviously there was some division, even among many Ateneans or even the Jesuits. So I think we have to recognize that. No? And when martial law was declared, for many people, the only available alternative, no, was joining, for example, the National Democratic Revolution or the Communist Party. And there were Ateneans who actually did that. No? Edgar Hobson, Billy Begg, Eman Lacaba, no, and others went underground and paid for that, no, by their lives. No? So there were Ateneans like that. But I think there were also Ateneans who decided to continue the work of Philippinization above ground. And for them, the meaning of Philippinization was not just to change the administration from American Jesuits, no, to Filipino Jesuits, but really to understand the situation of the poor. So this was a time also of immersion, no? Immersion programs. This was a time when expanding Ateneo programs to mean also social development. So this was 1973 was the Men and Women for Others Trust. No? This was also the time of the General Congregation, where the notion of faith and justice came in. So a lot of the organizations that eventually got into the anti-dictatorship struggle, especially in the 80s, were formed in the 1970s. Of course, they could not immediately confront the regime openly and politically because they were working above ground. But at the same time, the organizations were being formed. And I think it's not fair to the administration, no? Father Joe Cruz or Father Nebres in the School of Arts and Sciences, to say that they were pro-Marcos because this was happening, and this was continuous social formation work that was happening. And therefore, I think this was the basis for the shift from social involvement to political involvement, especially after the Aquino assassination. And I think this is very important, no, in building the nonviolent alternative, which crystallized in EDSA in 1986. So it did not emerge overnight. No? So it was not just 4 days of EDSA. This was a long process dating back to the late 1960s, but even through the 70s, no, when we were organizing, we were also forming student leaders, and eventually challenged them to get involved politically, to confront the Marcos government directly. Of course, that was provided by the democratic space out of the Aquino assassination. I think that was very important. No? I think it catalyzed a lot of the pent-up emotions and the need to get involved. And which was happening, you know? And I think the alternative of active nonviolence evolved at that time.
Ateneo responds in different ways, different during martial law. Were there differences because there is no perfect presidency? The accusation against Ateneo is that it was not as vocal during the pitfalls and the shortcomings of the Cory administration or of this administration of President Aquino. Is that a fair evaluation of Ateneo, that it was not as vocal compared to the Marcos era or the Joseph Estrada and EDSA too?
Well, I think it's not also fair, no? Because I think many of us recognize that EDSA was a genuine victory. That was a genuine popular achievement against dictatorship. So that's why I think our statement is also saying that we have to recognize that EDSA was something that was valuable, no? And therefore there was something really true about the victory over dictatorship. But I think we also know how imperfect even the vision of EDSA was, and there were also certain limitations the moment many of the democratic institutions were restored, no? Which included, I think, restoration of some elite. So we recognize its limitations in terms of inclusiveness politically. We still have a political system which in many ways favors the elite. Of course, we do have a social and economic system in which there's still a lot of poverty and inequality. And I think we have challenged both the Aquino presidencies, no? Cory Aquino and Noynoy Aquino, with regard to that. So that's why I think we've been calling for greater inclusiveness, both politically and also socio-economically. So I think it's not fair to say that we have been pro-government in that sense, because we have challenged the government. Although it's true that I think whenever the government is threatened, especially by extremist forces, I think this was very true during the Cory Aquino years, the series of coup attempts that happened in the late 1980s, was something that was very important to us because we challenged that too. We formed the Kilusan Laban sa Coup d'etat because we believed that the victory over dictatorship was genuine, and therefore we had to protect the Aquino government at that time. But at the same time, still continuing the challenge that it has to address problems of development and also of inequality and inclusiveness. So I think the same thing with Pinoy. I think we were also coming from a situation where we felt there was an abuse of power under the previous administration. So in a sense, there was also some support for efforts at greater transparency or good governance. But I think we recognize too that despite the growth, there's some need also to address inclusiveness together with transparency and good governance. So I think we've been pushing the government also to be accountable, but also making ourselves accountable, because we see ourselves as part of this community working for change.
Benjie, those who experienced EDSA 30 years ago say a lot of the present generation, our students, do not understand what we fought for then, the experience of EDSA. How do we keep those lessons alive? Paano natin isa sa buhay, mananatiling buhay ang mga nangyari noon para hindi makalimutan at di na muling mangyari ang mga bagay na pinaglaban natin noong araw?
Alam mo, totoo, na pag sinasabi mong generation, meron talagang kaugnayan dun sa karanasan mo ng panahon na yun. So, alam mo, era-defining events, define a generation because you experience the event. That's true, for example, for people who experienced the Declaration of Martial Law, 72, or even before, yung Battle of Menjola. Or let's say, for example, yung EDSA nga, 1986. But you can also say the same thing about our parents who went through World War II, the battle for the liberation of Manila. And some say, yung never again is also true of the atrocities during that time. So merong ganon, era-defining events, define a generation, but also separate them from the past and the present. So yun yung challenge, I think. But it doesn't mean that there can always be parang generational gaps that you cannot bridge those. So that's why I think the perspective even of the statement and what we've been saying, why there's a need for commemoration, is that you can actually talk not of generation gaps, but generational dialogue through storytelling. Kasi mahalaga yun Palagi ko maski na yung generation natin hindi naman dumaan sa World War II, natuto rin dahil sa mga kwento ng mga magulang natin. So pwede rin naman ikwento yun. Pero kailangan siguro buhay na kwento. Yun ang importante, yung buhay na kwento. Meron sinabi si Father Arevalo 30 years ago about the EDSA experience. Sabi niya, yung kwento ay disclosure stories. I think that's very significant because what he meant by that was that these are stories of people responding to a call for social involvement and political involvement. Maybe the call really was deep down coming from God, parang a faith-based call. But it was also inspiring others to respond. So kung ganyan ang pananaw mo dun sa story, halimbawa, tumugon ako dahil palagi ko merong tawag sa akin. Tapos dahil sa ginawa ko, merong iba naman na inspired din. Ay, yun ang maganda So if we can have stories like that of people responding, at some point, it's no longer just individual personal disclosure stories, it becomes a community response. So parang community nang tumutugon dito. Palagi ko kung ganun natin makita, yun ang kumbaga, miracle of EDSA. Ang miracle of EDSA, yung lahat, kumbaga, na-inspire, tapos tumugon dahil yung ibang tao tumutugon. Ibig sabihin, halimbawa, Ninoy Aquino assassination. for many people, that was very inspiring because it was not just the killing that was important. What was important was the witnessing. And when people see witnesses like that, they respond. And it's not just Ninoy, no? Others also saw Evelio Javier later on, no? O mismo si Cory Aquino. And maybe even little stories. Maski na yung nakilala nila sa EDSA, halimbawa, nakita lang, bakit sila nandun? Kasi para doon sa mga taong yun, mahalaga yun, hindi lamang para sa kanya, pero sa pamilya niya, para sa mas malawak na komunidad. So when you see also, for example, now, your own teachers responding to this because it's so important to them, that they feel that this is also their calling. So teachers are not just talking to their students, they're talking to a wider community because that community can respond. So I think if we have this kind of storytelling and dialogue, we can have generational collective action, as it were. No? Hindi lamang my generation or your generation. In fact, if we have some kind of common experience, we can work together as different generations for the common good.
You think it's a failure, our failure as a people, that the characters that we despised and we fought against in EDSA are still around? Is it a failure of us as a people? Masyado tayong mapagpagkatawad, and Imelda Marcos came to Ateneo, and Bongbong is still running for vice president. Di ba dapat wala na lahat yung mga yan?
Well, oo nga. Di ba madalas sinasabi na wala tayong kultura ng ostracism, no? Wala tayong ganun eh. Well, strength and weakness yun, no? Pero I think it's something that we have to guard against, no? So that's why if you focus on the positive and if you don't focus on the negative, what we can do is look at what are the things that inspired us. Of course, part of also the inspiration might be condemning things that we don't like. But if we focus, for example, on the need for transformation, even if we have achieved something that's very important, maybe it can galvanize us. No?
Last question. We've done probably a small part with the signing of the document. How can our students continue the story to probably the bigger masses of our people, to the next generation? Ano nakikita mong pwedeng gawin ng ating mga estudyante para manatiling buhay ang spirit ng EDSA?
At tingin ko, naman, no? Yung mga estudyante naman natin, namumulat din naman. Palagi ko meron ding pagnanasa na makilahok. No? Minsan nga sinasabi, di ba, merong criticism na apathetic daw yung mga kabataan. Hindi ako naniniwala dun eh. Parang ang mas nakikita ko nga, parang problema pa ng parang hindi sila empowered eh. Yung parang minsan kasi, dati natanong ko na yan sa mga estudyante, totoo ba na hindi kayo nakikisangkot? Pero ang sagot nila, hindi dahil ayaw namin makisangkot, pero tingin namin, kahit kami makisangkot, wala pa rin mangyayari. So palagay ko, ano yun, parang disempowerment yun eh, rather than apathy. So ang kailangan mong ibigay dyan, yung mga pagkakataon na pwede silang merong magawa. No? Di ba, bakit ba successful yung mga, maski Gawad Kalinga o minsan yung mga tutorial programs, no? Meron silang nakikita na pwede nilang magawa. Pero palagi ko, ang hamon, pag-ugnay mo yung mga maliliit mong ginagawa sa mas malaking proyekto. So, halimbawa ngayon, maski na simulan mo sa statement, di ba? Pero darating sa punto, kailangan mo ring pag-usapan, sino ba iboboto mo? Tapos, kung hindi lamang personalities ang kailangan mong pagpilian, kailangan bumuo ka ng organisasyon para yung binoboto mo, meron din programa, halimbawa. So palagi ko pwede yung maliliit na bagay na yun eh. Yung mga successful na involvement mga estudyante dati, halimbawa yung Sumilaw March dati, nung nagsimula yan, parang kampanya lang yan para bumili ng tsinelas eh, para doon sa mga magsasaka. Pero mula doon, nakilala nila yung magsasaka, no? Tapos talagang nakita nila na kailangan nilang tugunan yung problema, hindi lamang doon sa tsinelas, no? Pero pati yung lupa mismo. Pero pagka tugunan mo na yung problema sa lupa, kasi syempre, dadating yan sa policy eh, yung agrarian reform. Kasi kung nakikita mo may ginagawa yung maliliit na may mangyayari doon sa maliliit na bagay na ginagawa mo, merong tutunguhan eh, na mas malaking magagawa. So kailangan may iugnay yung maliit na pagtugon sa mas malawak na layunin.